let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at something that is genuinely unprecedented in the world of interactive design, the Almagam Engine V11. Now, if you're sitting there thinking this is just another standard game engine or some flashy text generator, go ahead and completely erase that from your mind. Almagam is, well, it's an avant-garde storytelling system. It's this incredibly complex framework that perfectly weaves together high-level mathematics, psychological archetypes, and dynamic code. The result? An experience that literally reads you. So instead of you just playing a game, this engine creates an entire universe that basically plays you right back.
To really understand how the universe works according to Amalgam, we have to start with its ultimate, non-negotiable rule. The core spec states the world is a dynamic isomorphism of the observer's state. Now, that's a very fancy, highly technical way of saying the reality you experience within this system is nothing more than a direct reflection of your own internal energy. You see, you aren't exploring some fixed, objective world that's just waiting for you. You are actually walking through a living, breathing, mathematical projection of your very own psyche. So, to wrap our heads around this rather dense and esoteric system, we're going to break it down into 5 key concepts. The narrative reality crystal, the universe as a mirror, understanding chakras and arcanos, how the narrative hologram is rendered, and finally, what they call the path to coherence.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1. The Narrative Reality Crystal. You might be wondering, how exactly does Amalgam store its stories if there are no linear scripts or, those massive branching dialogue trees? Well, it does it through the CMRN, or the Metastable Crystal of Narrative Reality. So instead of generating a point A to point B story, the engine generates an entire pre-collapsed structure of a universe before you even make your first choice. Everything, every NPC, every location, every possible event exists in pure potential, simultaneously within this crystal. The world doesn't just change randomly as time takes by. It reorganizes itself purely based on your interactions.
And this is exactly where we see how Amalgam and quantum computing are related. To manage all these infinite possibilities, the engine actually borrows its core logic straight from quantum mechanics. Think about a quantum bit, a qubit, right? It exists in a state of superposition, holding multiple values at once until it's finally measured. Well, Amalgam treats its narrative paths exactly like qubits. All the possibilities sit in superposition within this mathematical space they call a Riemann shell. Now, the story isn't physically running on a quantum computer, but it uses that exact logic. Your psychological interaction is the measurement that forces the abstract narrative to collapse into one single materialized reality.
Which brings us perfectly to our second point, the universe as a mirror.
So, how does this massive crystal actually interact with you? It comes down to the total mirror law. According to the specs, the universe does not react to your physical inputs. Let that sink in. It reacts to what you are in that exact moment. For example, if you try to attack an obstacle out of, say, fear or deep frustration, the mathematical system actually detects that emotional friction. You absolutely cannot win this system by brute forcing it or by just clicking the optimally correct dialogue option. The universe acts as a flawless active mirror. Your internal structural state completely dictates whether the environment around you is hostile or totally fluid.
All right, let's move to part 3 and look under the hood at chakras and arcanos.
So how exactly does a bunch of code measure who you are? It uses this brilliant, continuous feedback loop. When you make a move, the engine doesn't just register the action itself, it reads the underlying intent and translates that into an energy system using 7 functional modules, which they call chakras. Let's say you do something highly impulsive. That action might increase your will module, but suddenly block your intuition module. This internal shift updates your overall energy state, known in the system as vector psi. That new vector psi then reaches out and completely replicates the reality hologram around you, which then feeds back to you, forcing you to act again, and the loop just keeps spinning.
Behind the scenes, the system is constantly evaluating your overall energy against your ideal destiny, using some incredibly complex math, specifically a formula they call the Fisher-Rao gradient. Basically, think of it as a highly advanced spiritual compass. If you're internally aligned, you hit a state of resonance. The world literally becomes lighter, clear, and cooperative. Paths just open for you. But if you're acting out of alignment, the gradient detects that deviation and you get tension. The environment suddenly becomes heavy, dense, and super hostile. You'll literally start running into repeating narrative loops and aggressive characters. You are physically feeling the friction of your own internal resistance.
Let's look at part 4.
rendering the narrative hologram.
You're probably wondering how all these abstract mathematical states actually translate into a story you can read and play. The engine dubs this process the phenotypic collapse. Much like how your hidden genetics dictate your actual physical traits, this is that magical moment where the abstract math of the code crashes into your internal state. It filters through whatever seed universe you're in. Maybe it's a gritty cyberpunk city or a dark fantasy realm, and projects a tangible, playable reality, the hologram. And honestly, this is where the perception mechanics get absolutely fascinating.
This perfectly highlights the engine's law of differential perception. Consider how the exact same entity, say a massive obstacle governed by the archetype of the Emperor, is actually rendered for two different people. If the math says you are operating from a highly logical, analytical mindset, it renders the Guardian as this brutal firewall, a system of absolute symmetry and rigid cryptographic protocols. But if you're operating from an emotional, mystical mindset, that exact same underlying code renders as a mountain of pure will, a heavy vibration of authority, and an actual physical pressure on your chest that you have to spiritually resonate with to get past. The underlying truth is identical, but the reality rendered is entirely dependent on your own psychological lens. It's wild.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, the path to coherence.
So what's the ultimate goal of interacting with Amalgam? Well, the system tracks your progress using what it calls a luck function. But hear me out. In Amalgam, luck is not random chance. It isn't rolling dice. It is a direct, hard mathematical indicator of your structural coherence. If you've got high coherence, meaning your internal vector psi is fully aligned with your ideal path, you experience good luck. The system generates favorable synchronicities, the friction drops, and things just effortlessly flow. But if you have low coherence, you experience deviation. The system throws constant interruptions at you, weird unexpected failures crop up, and basically everything just feels like a massive, exhausting effort.
And I think this is probably the most profound takeaway from the entire Amalgam spec sheet. The system does not punish you. It simply reflects your state, amplifies it, and continuously dials up the environmental pressure until you are literally forced to change your internal structure. You don't hoard gold or accumulate raw power to beat this game. You don't level up your weapons. You only progress when your internal self evolves. The crushing pressure of the world only eases up when you finally balance your own internal system.
At the end of the day, the Amalgam engine proves that a system doesn't need to write a rigid script to tell an amazing story. It just needs to accurately and ruthlessly reflect the person interacting with it. Which leaves us with one incredibly profound question to ponder about this whole framework. If the universe is truly just a mirror of your internal coherence, what story are you forcing it to tell?